I'm Andrew Murata, host of the Education, Leadership, and Beyond podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you are listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome, High Tech Podcast. We're here. We did it. We're a thing. We've returned for the second part of a two-part episode.
Yeah, two parts. I don't know what are we calling these things.
We didn't
now?
call them series. We just called them a two-parter.
We've restricted ourselves into terms. Also, I just like to comment. I don't know if you know, because you made fun of me about my thing, which was like, hey. I was doing that for a while.
Yeah.
You're now doing we're here.
Okay.
Like we made it type of thing.
We're
when you do
here.
Your intros. Anyway, yeah, like we're
right.
you know, like we made it. You know, we're doing it. You know,
I think there's like a cognitive thing. Like I see you. Well, I always saw you, but like I know I'm being seen.
Aww.
What's up? Hi.
Yeah.
Shut up.
Wow, it went from
like
warm feelings to like get in the corner. You know.
Yeah. That's how we do.
It was just a quick move. That's all I'm saying. Okay.
I like it. I'm William Illingworth, one of your two co-hosts, with the other co-host, Joshua Swartz.
That is me.
Joshua R. Swartz.
Yes. It stands
he is the beard.
for really awesome.
Is that never mind. I was gonna nope. So another episode. We are back, folks. We're pretty stoked just to be on this topic of motivation. Both of us love this. It's one of those things that's always kept me very centered in education. When I left off last episode, I was like, this is Josh's episode. He's like, what? How do you mean this is my episode?
This is my episode. So turn off your camera, get out of here. No, I'm just
Bye.
Those listening in audio will cover his camera, in case you're curious. Which is another reason why you should go look at us at YouTube at High Tech Podcast. Subscribe, check out the video. Anyway, yes. So real quick pause. If you're listening to this episode and you haven't listened to episode 87, first of all, come on, what are you doing? Stop. Okay,
come on, please.
What are you listening out of order? Come on.
Do not Do not collect $200.
Number systems for a reason. You don't jump the line.
Yeah, we literally made numbers for podcasts, folk.
Yes.
Folk. You won folk.
You folk. You folk, sir. No, anyway.
You singular folk.
This is a two-parter. We did part 1 of Motivation Theory. I highly recommend listening to episode 87 before you listen to this episode. That's my note. If you chose to ignore it and you're still listening, I know.
Welcome.
You know. But we'll continue. It's fine.
That was like such a dad thing. I know you did it. You know you did it.
Yeah, we know. We're just going to move forward. It's time to move on. Hold on to no grudges. I don't know.
Okay. So.
Got weird.
This week, we want to talk about designing motivation into learning activities, right? Like how do we do this? Like we know maybe after 87, we know what motivation is or things we need to do to evoke motivation in our students. What do we do now to get it into our class experiences, Josh?
I will say a couple things. Like one, we made it clear last episode, if you're doing a tanks class, I still am the proponent taking them out. Take off, and the motivation will just come from there. Will tells me that is abusive. Emotional abuse.
It could be.
And I'm just saying, you sign up for a tanks class, you know what you're in for, okay? That's all I'm saying. What's the point if you don't get to shoot a tank? Although that could be a motivation thing. Promise at the end. If you pay attention, you'll get to shoot a real tank. I'm just saying.
You get to shoot at a real tank or shoot the tank at something? You
fire a tank at another tank.
Now there's two tanks. This is an expensive course.
I know. Listen, the budget is not. It's not important right now. Okay, learning has to happen.
Budget.
If you build this into the SLO, they can't tell you don't have the budget for it. I'm just saying, backtrack to the SLO. Okay, that's all principles from Josh in education. If you want an extreme budget, make extreme SLOs. That's the only thing. If you take it away from here, anyway. No, seriously. So how do we design for? I think the concept I like, and I didn't come up with this on my own. I've talked about this book several times. Designed for How People Learn by. This is the awkward pause because my app's not working. That's cool.
When Josh's brain stops working, what do we
there
do?
Dirksen, Jay Dirksen. It was actually Mendeley in this case. It was not working. This is before I started. I didn't get this book into Readwise yet. Readwise probably would have worked. Design for How People Learn. A lot of the concepts I get from what we'll talk about today in this episode comes from that book. A couple other places too that I like, but I really love that book. So if you haven't read it, I encourage going to check it out. There's a lot of cool stuff in there for. It's from the perspective of a designer who's not solely designing for just higher education, like is designing, like honestly is more Will kind of where you're at now, like in like corporate environment. But there's a lot of stuff to take away from it. Gotcha. And they have an entire chapter called, and I like the way they term it, or Dirksen terms it, and all of a sudden Dirksen's become a billion people.
Dirksens. We have one folk and many Dirksens.
Yes, it's weird. We live in a weird village with tanks and multiple people. With apparently an extreme budget. It's run by Google. Anyway, so the title of the chapter is Design for Motivation. Okay. I like this phrase, design for motivation. So like when you're designing your assessments in your course, whether it's an online course, you're designing like literally a digital space that they click on, or you're designing a course that students are interacting with. It's thinking about designing not just to achieve SLOs and goals, but to actually motivate students to learn the topic you're talking about, right? Or to learn the core concept of the course. And they talk a little bit about like part of this is we've talked about this before in some of our past episodes about designing for learning. How to design for learning, episodes 27 and 28. Look at me, just cross-referencing each episode. Well, that was a two-parter too. Inspiration a lot for that. This 2 episodes came from this book, actually. So it ties into it. But we talked a lot about in that, like, when you're designing, you have these SLOs you're trying to achieve, but you're trying to essentially say, what's the end person I want at the end of the course, right? What do I want the student to know, look like, be able to do, say, become. Like essentially that's what, become, that's what your SLOs are. And you're really designing to say, where do they start? And then how can I get them across those gaps, right? The concept of designing for innovation is to say, okay, if I'm trying to get them across the gap, how can I design that encourages them to want to get across that gap, right? It's not just enough to say, here's the gap, here's where I want them to be, but the student also needs to also want to be that.
Right.
If they don't want to be that, then the part of it's falling apart, all your work in there. So that's this concept of designing for motivation, I think is how I would define it, right? Is how do you make the assessment in the course and the content designed in a way that actually builds on helping motivate the student to want to be that end goal, or at least something like that to reach those goals, right?
An example of that I've experienced, and I'll kind of put this out there, you tell me if it really hits, right? I had a faculty member at one time who had her students create white pages, right? So 1 page of information, go research X theory, and you had to make a 8 by 12, 8 by 11, whatever, page on that theory. And she found that students did or didn't do it, or it wasn't always great, or blah, blah, blah. And so we were like, all right, how do we get the students to be more engaged in this, take it more seriously, have more fun with it maybe? And we turned it into like an infographic activity, right? They had to create it in, I think, Adobe Spark, for instance, right? And they had to go through and make something beautiful that also still communicated the information that used to be on those white pages. She was finding, anecdotally, that people were more motivated, were actually doing it, and most of them looked pretty good. Would you say that fits, right? Like there was a motivation thing to try and get people into it, and that was changing the assessment up to include like visual design and something more interesting to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's part of it. Like designing some of the assessments too, not to just be something boring they're putting at the end, but they giving them a
Right.
way to take ownership and have creativity with it, we know can help motivate people to engage. I think that's one of the ways, right? You can motivate people in a small way is like
Right.
rethinking an activity, right? I think there's a lot of other ways too. And part of the thing that I really like about what Durkins gets at in their book, and they didn't come up with this. It comes from somebody else. I've been trying to figure out who it was. I can't because we didn't do heavy research, but go get the book. I'm sure she'll help clarify. They call it the elephant theory. Okay, and I want to describe this here for a second because I think it's interesting. They give this concept of essentially like they talk about it with the example in the book is like, you know, how do you convince people not to drink and drive or something along those lines, right? Like, but the theory is that each of us has this part of us that's kind of like the thinking part of us that knows we shouldn't do something or knows we should want to do something. And then the elephant part of us, which is the emotional, visceral part of us who's in the here and now. And they say, view it this way. The logical person is the person riding the elephant. Okay. The emotional, visceral part of us is the elephant. Okay. If you want to convince the elephant rider to go somewhere, you got to get the elephant to want to move. Okay.
Right.
The rider is not really great at doing that on their own. And so it's this idea of, it's really not complicated, but it's this idea that if you want someone to do something, they need to actually believe that what you want them to do is going to be useful to them or is going to be helpful or is worth their time. Right. Or else we're not going to do it. Like at the end of the day, that's where some of us will do it because, and that's where I think like we're getting at designing for motivation, and they're really talking about trying to design for kind of an intrinsic motivation, the desire to want to do something, right? Obviously you can bring an outside force in and change somebody's opinion, but we know that doesn't always get the best learning result at the end. And so how do we design courses for that type of stuff? Does that make sense? Like, does that feel like that kind of clicks with what you've seen?
And I think you were looking for the author of the Elephant Theory, who's Jonathan Haidt.
There we go. That's
Haidt. I'm assuming that's pronounced Haidt, so forgive me, Jonathan, if that's not. You know, we're now good friends, Johnny boy.
Yeah, hit us up on Twitter.
It's
podcast screwed up my name. You know, you can do it. That's fine.
It's all the more fun, listener and viewer. At the moment, neither of you are seeing this, but like the image itself that Josh has for reference is this just ginormous real elephant with a stick figure on it. And it's not even like a human riding an elephant to like, no, it's like, it's the most ridiculous thing it possibly could be, right? Like a stick figure is the logical, conscious driver, and the elephant is a real stubborn, huge, tons weighed elephant, right? Like clearly this stick figure is not, it's just poignant. This metaphor really sinks home to the fact of how many students have sat there in your class like an elephant. I know I've seen them in the classes I've actually taught, both in the martial arts and in college, excuse me. But then the faculty I've helped have always bemoaned this. This is not a new issue. Yeah. This is something that's like every faculty member I've ever worked with has had some difficulty with motivating this student so that they get their elephant to move. You know, they actually motivate themselves and get going.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think there's a bunch of different ways. And again, Will and I aren't the experts in these areas either, right? So like we're, I think, learning how to do this as we go and doing different things. But the takeaways I've had from this and where I found most useful, a lot of use,
sure. All
the using in designing courses and even like working in courses is to say the biggest takeaway for me was, okay, if we want to design for motivation, we need to figure out ways in courses to make future usefulness of whatever we're teaching or skills we're imparting or whatever we're doing, the future usefulness of reaching that goal, a reality now. Like we need to help them see the usefulness now, not later, not just tell them it's going to be useful. The classic, I know you don't like this math class, but one day you won't have a calculator in the middle of the desert and it will be useful then. You know, like
And you'll
that,
need to perform calculus in the desert.
in the desert, right? Like is to help with that and help them understand the concept. I mean, there's a lot of different ways we can do this. But like a couple ways that I've really enjoyed and I think have been helpful for me is one, find ways to provide controlled failure in your course. Okay, so I like this concept where you ask them to solve an issue, do something, but you know the end result of the learning assessment and experience is going to be that they don't really do it well or they struggle with it, right? And there's a lot of cognitive science to talk about why this works too, but there's also this thing that I like doing, which is it puts them in a situation where they're presented a challenge and you know that the thing that you want to bring in or the content or what you're teaching can help solve that challenge.
Yep.
And that helps present for people usefulness of things. Like a classic is simulation and like counseling courses and things like that. Like this is one of the things I think about, putting them in a situation that's difficult that they have to work through in here, that they can actually use maybe what you've given for them. Or what I like to do is actually just throw them into that simulation first, have it be incredibly difficult, have no answers, and then go, okay, here's some of the stuff that might help you down this road. All of a sudden, that topic, that idea, the theory about how people think, or the theory about how you do that type of situation, right, becomes a lot more real. Like in a leadership course, you can tell people the 5 principles of leadership, which there aren't, but you can tell them what you've decided are the 5 principles of leadership, or you can actually put them in a scenario where they've got to try to lead, and without it, and then come back in and say, okay, well, this is how these things have helped me in this area, right? And like that's I love this style of doing it, which is putting them in this area where showing them where they could use it and creating that dissonance to get them to a point where the desire and motivation for that to be something they understand exists.
And this reconciles with what I've done in martial arts instruction, like hand-to-hand physical stuff. You will never see a student's eyes more glued to you, more open, more like, holy crap, excited, than when you show them, tonight's class is going to be on throws. And they're like, oh, cool, sure, throws, whatever. And you're like talking through the throw and the techniques to throwing the person. And then you pick the student up and throw them on the ground. Like they stand up and they're like, holy crap, that was amazing. How'd you do that? They're immediately engaged with the fact of like, you're not just picking me up because you're big and strong and tall. Like there's a technique that I just used to throw you on the ground and you had no way to resist the movement. And that student is very suddenly engaged in the fact of they don't know the technique yet. They don't know that there's 5 to 6 to 7 different movements involved in doing it. All they felt was they were standing and now they're looking up at you from the floor. That moment for students, I think, is a lot of what you're speaking to, like where they see the actual success point is the motivation to go back and say, okay, well, now how did you do it? That was really cool. Teach me all of the steps to get me to the point where I could throw you. And I know that was the first time I ever got engaged with something like that. I was like 10 or 11 years old. I had a big adult telling me, this is a way you can like throw me. I was like, that's impossible. You're like 7 feet tall and 300,000 pounds. Like I'm 11, right? Like it seems like you're telling me to move an elephant. And he shows me the technique and then he does a punch at me and I threw him. And I was just like, oh, that's how. I'm amazing. This is so cool. Now, hopefully, we're not going to be pulling our students down onto the lectern hall and throwing them in the middle of class. Yeah. But I think the principle stands of like showing them, giving them something that might be stressful or giving them something that might not work, like you're saying. Give them like half of the techniques or give them the expectation that we should be throwing students, right? Then do it. Let them wrestle with it, then do it. And I bet you, like I've seen that time and time again, they will be engaged with how you did it. It's like magic. Like, oh, you made the card disappear. Well, now I want to know how you made the card disappear. Yeah. Can I make the card disappear? Like that's
And then I think the important part is not just leaving it there, like to the stuff you're talking about. It's then showing how whatever concept or thing you're going to engage with in the course at that point can actually become a help or a usefulness to that situation. And then I think it's important then after that to provide then, and we talk about this with formative assessment, providing small chances for wins that build up to a bigger one, right? With a promise of the more and more you do this, the more and more you'll get this. Because what it starts to do is create a need and show them then a path towards understanding how to deal with that issue more. Right. And so I like those components. Now, again, that looks different in course to course. It looks different in what you're doing, but designing assessments in ways to do some of that, I think helps. Right. And in some courses that's easier. Like we've given examples, like a martial arts course where they're coming already with the anticipation they want to learn martial arts, or some kind of thing. We talk about a counseling course. Most of those they're coming to them because their major has something to do with counseling. So there's a different situation. I know some of you listening might be like, yeah, but I'm I teach a humanities course that they're required to take the first year. Like how do I motivate them there? Yeah. Or English 101. Right. I think there's ways to still show problems and issues. And that's where it comes back to from part one, us talking about how to find out who is your student, what does motivate them, where are they, and finding that in to then say, okay, how can I leverage that in my course? Sometimes it's not always going to be present a problem that they have to practically deal with at work when they get done with college. Sometimes it's, okay, what are my students motivated by? Well, I have a lot of students coming in first year. They're seeing a lot of problems in the world. They want to solve a lot of these problems. Well, I'm history 101, or whatever. What if I take this history class, not just as a, here's what happened, but actually taking it, which is why most of us are passionate about it, of like, this is literally the story of humanity through this period of time. And we learn more about problems and issues and how we can handle, like, again, I'm giving a very basic overview, but there's a way to kind of package this as something more than just history knowledge, because at the end of the day, you as a professor teaching history, that's not why you love history anyway. Why are you excited about history? Not because of the random facts. Most history professors I talk to are excited about history because they learn more about humanity and more about the story of how we got to where we were. And some love it because they feel more connected to the people in their past, their heritage. Some love it because they learn from history about what we can do today. Those same motivations are same motivations in some of your students. It's finding ways to help them realize that, and help them see those problems. And so when we design things where we provide not just regurgitate these facts, but here's a problem, or here's a thing that this content will be useful for, and then providing them those small chances for success that build over to bigger ones, I think are really helpful.
And that's where, when we're looking at this issue across the points of like making learning and thinking face to face or online, it is going to be different, not only regardless of your topic, but like how you're delivering the content. I've been thinking, and I almost don't even want to say it, but like, what do we do? How do we take this approach to the classic online discussion board? That's one of those things I find typically not to be written well in the first place, right? But the biggest issue is, even if you have one that you feel is going to be a good motivator or could be helpful for the students or would be a riveting conversation in person, right? Like, you could write a good prompt, be like, dude, if we put this in class right now, everybody would talk their mouths off. How do we, make discussions more motivating? I don't know that there is a perfect answer, but that's one that, like, this comes to me as like the top challenge. This is something that's consistent. Lots of faculty use discussion boards. Lots of them bemoan them. Lots of students hate them, right? So is there something in this principle that we really need to apply to the discussion board to make sure that it's going to be more motivating?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. I think there's a lot of I think we've talked about discussions before. We'll do more discussions on discussions. I think there's two parts to difficulties of discussions. One is the design of discussion, and two is, I wish I could just go talk to all LMSs and have them reconceptualize their system for discussions. But that's beside the point. I think if we're just dealing with the concept and like the prompts and things, I think it depends. I mean, I think it's like, you can use discussions to, like, okay, so good example, right? I didn't design this part of the course, but I did actually like it in the course I was teaching last semester. There was a discussion they were talking about a certain theory, right? And the discussion presented a statement from somebody. I forget who it was. It was some writer or something making a statement. And the discussion then asked them to say, look at this statement based on the reading that we're doing this week on these two theories. There's kind of this reading that we were looking at. There were two different ways to interpret it. And you have to get the students to engage with the two different ways to interpret it, right? The way they designed that discussion was to say, here's a statement from this writer based on what we've been reading this week. Are they right or wrong? And there was a requirement then to engage with people who said the opposite and to ask questions and dig into it. Now, this is a very small thing, and it could have been designed. There were still things I'd enhance about the way we did it and the prompt. But the one thing I do think it did well is it provided a challenge, which was to say, are they right or wrong? Like it wasn't regurgitate the theories for me. It wasn't do any of these things. It was based on this.
Make a choice.
Is make a choice and explain why. Explain why you've made this choice. Right? Yeah. Or like a really good example was there was an interpretation they had to make. And then there was later on, I've liked doing this before, you present a discussion where it's a scenario they have to deal with. Like it's a very real scenario. This person with this background comes and asks you this question. How do you respond? Right? Like how do you, in light of what we're reading, respond to this? Right? That's one way. I think some of the other ways in discussions, it's like I'd love to use a discussion to present a challenge or a question scenario they have to solve the first moment of the week. Like that's the first thing they have to do. And then they actually engage with the content, right? Like they have to solve it on their own.
Right.
Right. And then they engage with the content. Then they have more discussion about how they would change their answer now. Right.
A second time in this little two-parter where scaffolding is the answer.
Yes, I think scaffolding helps a lot in this area.
Right.
Right, where like you have to scaffold
the right material in the right order.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of different ways to do it, but that's like a few initial ideas. I think like you could leverage discussions, mainly because I feel like the weakness of LMS discussions is they're not really discussions.
No,
they're joint areas to share ideas. Like you don't actually have real discussion in discussions because it's not like a chat system like Slack. It's not like an area where you're constantly engaging throughout the week. It's set time frames that they are to engage.
It's much more like I throw my thought at the wall and then you throw your thought at the opposite side of the wall. And we just sit there and throw thoughts at the wall.
Like, honestly, part of my thing to fix discussions is I think they should be longer than just over that week. The standard online course usually does like a discussion that's like that week, then they have another discussion next week.
Right.
I think there should be discussions over multiple weeks that are building on each other in the same discussion thread. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. But I think that's some of what you could do in there. I think viewing discussions, not just to say, hey, regurgitate what you read this week, ask some other people questions, but actually using it to build scenarios for students to engage with that challenge them to not just synthesize content, but apply it to real life scenarios or circumstances, or start to use critical thinking in areas. I don't know.
Golf clap. No, I think that this is the right way to tackle this. And again, we've built on the fact of what we think motivation is and what we should be addressing in the students. So now we just have to take those considerations and put them into our assessments, put them into the activities. Yeah. It's a really good connection here. And I love the elephant metaphor. A, because it's beautiful. B, because it's kind of speaking back to that emotional response thing that I was talking to. I was also noticing like there's some language in there that they're using that connects over to self-determination theory, where they kind of use like an autonomous and controlled dichotomy to explain like what are we doing, how are we responding, are we doing it for our own kind of like knee-jerk or involuntary response versus a controlled or intentional response. And we need to be able to cultivate those things, the good, the controlled, the logical, and the like difficult, the illogical, the autonomous or just kind of reactionary responses from our students, and make sure that they're pointed in the right direction. That truly is education. Grab the student, point them in the right direction, and hopefully they learn in that direction.
Yeah.
We cannot
Yeah.
physically impart knowledge, so there's a lot of hope involved.
Yeah. I think their biggest thing there is just that the kind of automatic emotional idea, which is what they give to the elephant, elephant in the room, and kind of
Waka,
concept, Waka,
waka.
is that at the main point of it, it's a lot of that we are people who are focused in the here and now in many ways, and
Mm,
a lot of this is just helping students now need what you're giving to them, right? Like helping motivate in that way, whatever that ends up looking for it. And to do that's a combo of, I think, challenge and building scaffolded, low stakes success wins for them so they can start to engage with it and feel like they're making progress, feel like they're actually gaining something out of this and they're seeing the use then.
yeah.
Right. And the other, I think the big part too is just to mention all of this then too is also trying to pull back this, what I call like the veil of complexity, which is this idea of like pulling back the helping students understand the concepts, seeing where they're
Mm,
going to get confused, see where things might be complex, and helping them pull apart those into more understandable chunks, so that trying to understand a concept doesn't seem overwhelming. Right?
right.
I think you don't want to overwhelm them with concepts. You want to overwhelm them with problems and challenges that the concepts and the content and the things that you're teaching help with. That's
There
how
you
I would
go.
probably put it, is overwhelm them and challenge them. That sounds bad, overwhelm them. But you know what? It's fine. Overwhelm them with the complexity of a challenge,
Yeah.
and then in a way that is not necessarily solved, but helped by whatever it is that you're teaching or the content, things that you're trying to impart to them in that course, right? The new system of thinking, the new system of doing something, whatever you're doing in that course, the end goal uh, should help solve the complexity that you're giving them.
I love that,
Um,
and it speaks to some of my experiences. Like Josh knows, and I have a pretty big penchant for writing. I was a writing tutor. I like writing. I care where the commas are. Like that's my thing. That was not always my thing. I hated writing growing up. I was not very good at it. And I struggled very much so in high school to like even finish some of my assignments because I had that kind of reactionary, wide-eyed approach. Like, oh my gosh, this is too big. There's too much to do here. I would get overwhelmed with the problem at hand, or the task itself. It wasn't ironically until I got to college and I was made to do an outline, which I hated. I was made to do an outline and I realized, holy crap, this makes this easier. I literally remember one of the first times I made a deep outline for like a 10-page paper. By the time I was done the outline, I almost copied and pasted the outline into my paper document and just like added transition sentences. Like it was,
mhm.
I had done so much work in the outline that the paper wrote itself. That's the point, right? And I find it funny that we're dealing with this elephant metaphor from a psychological motivational approach, but the one of the biggest metaphors about elephants that people use is how do you eat an elephant, right? The idea being there, how, oh my gosh, an elephant's so big, you eat an elephant one bite at a time.
Or not at all. Just eat a burger. It's just saying. But if we had to eat an
it's
elephant, yeah, one bite at a time.
it's fine, right? It's
It's
fine.
fine.
Sorry PETA lovers, we're just using a metaphor here, but right, like once I understood that complexity was something I could address systematically,
Hmm.
I would say I became a good writer. And I love writing, and I became a writing tutor, and I've tutored undergrads, grads, and doctoral students, right? I think I have a pretty good breadth of knowledge when it comes to this at this point. Coming from someone in middle school, early high school, hated writing, wouldn't do it, would fight it tooth and nail. I was motivated. I was given the skill to take it step by step, and break down the big thing into a smaller, less complex issue, and then learn how to
Yeah.
complete the task. I'm consider myself a success story, folks. I hope you and your students can find the ways to do this in your classrooms and in your online context too, because this is one of those things that, again, I now love it. I love outlining. I love writing. I love helping people with their writing. So it was a big turnaround for me, and it can be a big turnaround for other folks as well.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, anything else, Mr. Design Man?
I got nothing. That's it. Just do those
Wow.
things. No, there's lots of stuff to talk about. I think that's enough for this episode. I will keep saying it till I'm blue in the face. I don't know why this is saying that. Seems I'm just thinking about things now. But Design for How
I'm
People
blue
to
in the
Learn.
face.
It's a great book. This stuff does not originate with me. A lot of this originates with that book and a couple other books I've read in that area. So check it out. And well, I'm still learning how to do this too. It's much easier to talk about this in 30 minutes on a podcast than it is actually designing a course. So I think just start with one of those things. Try to figure out how you could maybe bring challenge in, how you could find some place to build some success points for your students, where there's a complex thing that you can try to break down more so that they understand it. I think there's a lot of ways to do that.
Yeah.
Now, you can design things, but sometimes you just want technology. I don't know. I didn't have a good transition.
I was wondering. I was like, I've been struggling with some things in my head.
This name doesn't work for a transition for me.
I was gonna try and make it something like Sutori into the next. I didn't.
Yeah, no. The app we're talking about today is called Sutori. Okay, yeah, that's why we couldn't come up with a transition. If you had a transition for that, if you're listening to this episode and you're going, "Oh, I thought of a transition," hit us up on Twitter.
You are on this, man. You're
at
doing
High
great.
Tech Podcast.
You're doing the cross episode references.
Yeah,
you're calling people to social.
Let me know. We know somebody out there would like to talk to us. Just do it, please. It's fine. The Iceland listener from last episode. If you're listening, go hit us up on Twitter.
Call back. Just golf clap, buddy. Golf clap.
Anyway, I made up for my horrible transition. We're talking about an app called Sutori, and that's all I'm going to tell you because I'm going to be honest. I don't know this app nearly as well as Will does. So I'm a listener just as much as you are. Actually, hold on. Let me.
Oh gosh. Listeners, he just repositioned himself to be a little student for me.
I was positioning in the student format.
It's kind of cute, I guess. Let's just walk away.
Yeah,
from
you made that worse. Just talk about the app.
Sutori is a presentation tool. It can go both ways, as most presentation tools do. So you can use this to present to your students. You could have your students use this to present to you, right? That's pretty standard across presentation tools. I'll read you their tagline off the website. You could use this for portfolios, unit previews, self-paced courses, digital notebooks, multimedia lessons, timelines, and much more. Okay, there's their sales bit. # not a sponsor. Sutori is a tool that I used with faculty at my last institution where they were trying to build timeline experiences. And timelines, ironically, are more difficult in educational technology to create. It's not something that a lot of folks like in a Google Doc or a Word doc. It's like, oh, well, put a picture, then do a heading for the year, and then do a paragraph text. Yeah, they can do that. It just doesn't look like a timeline. And a lot of folks in education, like teacher education specifically, not like education broadly, but teachers who teach primary and secondary education teachers, they have experiences in classrooms where they do realia and they put a string and they hang things from the string to make, there's a lot of ideas that come to mind for folks when it comes to timelines that drove the instructor I was working with to Sutori. They specifically wanted this experience where there's it's specific. They wanted the line down the middle of the overall timeline, and they wanted to see things branch off piece by piece according to the time that those things were associated with. So this met the need perfectly. It's got great ways to integrate while you're doing that organization and timeline style. One element could be a picture. Another could be a YouTube video. Then it could just be a narrative paragraph. You could put just one word or a header. It's pretty straightforward when it came to building the timelines out. Full disclosure, that is the only activity I helped her with on this assignment. It was a couple semesters, right? But she wasn't using this to have the students create speeches or do portfolios like they suggest. She really wanted a super timeline tool, and it met the need for that context, especially in the free version where they get the basics. They can create stories, they can add text and images, share and collaborate, they can present it. They cannot, so this I wasn't paying attention to, but they can't add videos in the free version. So they do need to have a paid up version to do videos and some other things like that. But for most of the content that these people were doing in the free version, that was enough. Just get some organized information together. You could use this for a presentation yourself. I could see somebody using this to like map out a project plan, just like storyboarding, more of the storyboarding approach to a project plan as opposed to the actual task and project definitions. At a price level, though, I actually don't think it's too bad. It's $10 a month. It is designed to be an instructor's license, which I don't know if you've listened to all of our episodes, dear listener, but William, this co-host, does prefer professor licenses over student licenses.
Yes,
I do
100%.
not like when a company pays you, charges you per seat. At the end of the day, that means to me that the student is paying another company for their education. I don't agree with that philosophically. And I also know economically that cost just gets rolled up into their tuition. It gets rolled up. Now, take that for granted as you need to. I believe that if the instructor pays for an annual tool to use while teaching, that is a better philosophical approach. Yes, that cost still does get rolled up into the rest of everything else, but I'm hoping that that's a CapEx expense, that's a part of the work they're doing. It's just like paying for the building that they're in. A student should not be paying you or paying someone else to do more stuff in your classroom. They're already paying that fee. It's called tuition. You using a tool, much better. If you pay $120 a year, you get unlimited number of students assigned. So you pay, this is a tool for you now. All of your students can participate in your Sutori classroom presentations.
Yeah, I'm a bigger fan of teacher paid stuff as well, over student in any case, for sure. And I will say, just from looking at it, you can definitely tell timeline is their biggest use. It's like almost all of their presentation example. But I will say it's pretty cool. Like you can create like a section of the timeline that jumps out, and you click into that, and then that takes you into a presentation on more of the information. Like the example they give is like through timeline, there's a point in the timeline when the Mayan civilization, right, exists, right? And they click into that, and that takes them into a more focused area about the Mayan civilization, right? And you're saying, Josh, you said it 2 different ways. I know, figure it out. But you click onto the timeline, right? So I like it. I think it's a cool tool. It's obviously like I can think of some other tools that can do similar stuff, but I think for pricing and kind of what they do, it's worth a try, especially if you're looking for something like that. Sometimes you're just looking for specific scenarios, right? Like we had one just this week. Like it's where it's a very specific scenario. They're like, I used to walk my students around the classroom to look at things, so I want like a panorama thing.
Oh, a carousel activity.
Like a carousel activity. You can blame Justin for that one. So
that sounds right.
Yeah,
that was you wanted to do it virtually.
Yeah, something like that. We ended up near a hotspot solution instead. We actually found a better, I think, solution for what we wanted to do there. But anyway, sometimes you just want that solution. And I love timelines. Timelines are great. We have a couple tools that do them, but they're way more expensive than this. So I would say check those out. Or check.
If you pay up, you get videos, quizzes, audio, add any file. Bulk upload of media, you get headings, links, customizations. There are analytics. That always gets Josh's interest. Analytics, great. There's some LMS integration, stuff like that. So again, not a sponsor, but we're pretty cool with this one. I enjoyed the use that my faculty member had for it. And the products at the end of the day were easy. If you had an in-classroom timeline activity and you are now doing something online or you have a hybrid experience, I would say that this is a great recommendation to replace that physical timeline tool. It also has all that other stuff, right? It's not, it's a one size meets all if you need it to be, but it's a really good timeline tool. Check it out for that.
That's cool. I like it. Okay. Well, that is episode 88. Putting on. Oh, I know what you're doing. That's funny. Anyway, so next episode 89, we are going to be interviewing Justin Phillips, a friend of Will's that he met while eating a bagel. Is that that's the story? Okay,
literally, I purchased the bagel from Justin.
Oh, you did? Yeah. From him?
Yeah, okay, from him. He was selling the bagel.
He was selling the bagel. So did you just like in the bagel conversation? We're like, thanks for the bagel. Do you work in education?
That'll come out next. That'll
Okay,
come
it'll
out
come out in the interview. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait for next week to find it out. In
Some
episode 89.
intrigue.
Yeah,
some
we need some
mystery.
intrigue. We're starting kind of not an intentional 2-part series next week with this, but it's happening anyway. And I'm guessing this is why the glasses are here, or is this just a thing you're starting?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay. Whatever. Who knows? Which is kind of about like things you can't that are harder to learn online. Okay. And so Justin's gonna start that off with us. Not the other Justin. He'll be back eventually.
Not Dr. Justin Harbin, but
Yeah, not
Justin
Duck
Phillips.
Justin. That's what it sounded like you were about to say. Duck Justin. Not Justin Harbin. But Justin Phillips. He will be talking. We're gonna talk a little bit about with him his experience with teaching art education online and what that kind of looks like. So. But that'll be kind of kicking off a little bit of a kind of 2-part series because actually Will's brother will be coming on episode 90 the week after that to talk about acupuncture education online. And if you're like, what is happening to you guys? You're talking about acupuncture?
Yep.
You are right. We are.
This is
and
the high-tech
honestly,
podcast, folks.
I'm gonna pull the fourth wall away. We've already recorded that episode and it is gonna be awesome. So
Can't
I
wait.
am super psyched for that. So you want to check that out next week. The Justin Phillips episode, not Will's brother, and then Will's brother after that. Kind of listen to both
2
areas. 2 episodes. So again, you can find us at Twitter or YouTube at High Tech Podcast. If you want to know what Will is wearing right now on his face, go check out our YouTube at High Tech Podcast. Subscribe. We have 9 right now on YouTube. We just started. I was super excited that we had 9 because we only had 3 the other day, and now I've been informed that some of them are Will's family. So if you're not really, hey, listen, I love Will's family. If you're listening, I love that you subscribe. I love that you listen to the podcast. I would like a broader audience too, you know? So I think that's fine. It's acceptable. So if you are not related to Will, subscribe to the podcast. If you're related to Will, subscribe to the podcast anyway. I don't care. I just want more subscribers. Okay? So Twitter, YouTube at High Tech Podcast, email us inbox at hightechpod.us or check out our website, hightechpod.us. If you're listening, if you're watching on YouTube, handles right here, right down over here. Okay. That we don't need to do that again. Anyway, thank you again for joining us another week as we continue to learn what it looks like to harness technology and student motivation in the classroom, whether online or in person or hybrid, or as Will said last week, wherever the heck they are. I don't know what other options there are. I don't smoke signal courses. I don't know. Whatever it is, harnessing technology in those options. Thank you as we continue to learn what that looks like. See ya.
See ya.